Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat, where we are back on with Shauna Ericksen. I've been stayed connected with Shauna since our last time we talked on the interview, just on and off, and throughout that process we've talked about doing a follow-up, but then a lot of things happened in her life with what she was planning to do, from school to career to just how everything played out. And we talked about maybe having the conversation, wasn't the right time. Ultimately, Shauna reached out and we found the right time, and that is what this podcast episode is about. It's just her story about what she went through in her doctoral program, what she had to think about in terms of continuing on, letting it go, and just a lot of those tough decisions that we all face. But Shauna wanted to share her story in case others maybe have something similar that they're going through and want to just hear what somebody else had. And so that is what we talk about. So lots to take away from this one. I really appreciate Shauna for taking the time and the energy to do this, because I know it was not easy for her. Having trouble hiring, having a hard time trying to provide enough resources to the patients that you serve, might be worth checking out Wave On Health. It's changing the way athletic training services are provided to patients and athletes anywhere. It's really getting going. People are getting interested in it. Something I would have definitely looked at if I could have back in my different roles. But check out Wave On Health. Let them know that you heard about it on the AT Chat podcast, and just hear what they have to say and go from there. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Can't thank them enough, as always. So with that, please check them out. If you're winding down the year, got a little bit of budget to spend, highly recommend checking out their stuff, especially Revive. Super competitive for pricing, FDA approved for what it does. Great piece of technology. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Well, welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are back on with Shauna Ericksen, and I was just looking back. It was episode 72, talking about Movement Matters, which I'm sure we'll kind of tie in here a little bit as well. But when we connected at the time, Shauna was working through a PhD program. We kind of loosely stayed in touch, but then reconnected just a little while ago, and a lot has happened, all kinds of things. And ultimately, that's what we're having this conversation about, without trying to get too far into it, and just a lot of taking a bigger picture of looking at what works, what doesn't work, how to make these super tough decisions. And yeah, I'm going to stop rambling about that because I feel like I'm just not taking it anywhere. But why don't I just turn it over to you, to kind of just give a background on what's happened over when we said that was January of 21. I think we talked in 2020. What's
Yeah.
been going on over the last couple of years, and then we'll get into more of the details.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the platform. We've talked a couple of times before we actually decided to sit down and do this episode. I don't remember who reached out to who initially, but I think one of us checked in, and I wasn't doing so well last year, towards the end of my run in my PhD program. And so I've worked through a lot. 2023 was pretty much a doozy. I feel like everybody went through a pretty rough 2023. I don't know why. It
I feel
seemed
like it's just been
pretty,
like a theme since 2020.
yeah,
Like, it's just hasn't stopped.
yeah. I literally had the one good thing happen and I got married. So it was like everything else was going through a trudge, just to get to that point. But I'm definitely in a much better space now, mentally, emotionally, and professionally. So I'm really excited to share with everyone kind of the experience, and hopefully people will respond to it and maybe can relate on going through a similar experience, whether it's in higher education or just a professional setback on different levels. So yeah, it's essentially what I'm here to talk about today, is everything I sort of went through that process. And so January 2021 was going it was in the spring semester of my second year in my PhD program. So things were going pretty well. I mean, aside from the whole COVID setback that everybody suffered through, especially in grad students, like it was pretty rough. And to have, an administration that wasn't readily equipped to do the whole virtual and distant learning thing, it was a learning experience for everybody. Um, so we were continuing all of our classes online still at that point. I think we had a little bit of access to the lab if we needed to be in there, but I wasn't doing any in-person data collection. I think I was working with the sports team still doing intervention. I'm not 100% sure 2021 if they were back on the field or not, but they might have been. I don't know. So I could have been going to campus like in and out randomly, but was not there every single day. And I think I was also in process of finishing up a paper that I ended up getting published that summer, which was awesome. I gave my proposal that year, I believe. So things were looking good as far as like setting myself up for success and getting through the PhD in the 4 years that we had originally planned as a team. Um, and then yeah, so everything went fine. Um, so there's a couple of landmarks throughout the PhD process, right? Like you're supposed to do a comp exam, which is essentially done with at the end of the second year. But our program was fairly new. I was the first cohort of that program, and so my comp exam actually didn't happen until the spring semester of my fourth year. And I had already done my proposal at that point. I had already had a paper published. I was already towards the end of my first study and well into the recruitment stage of my second study, which was intervention. And just a refresher, people didn't know what my PhD was looking into. I was researching the effects of mindfulness intervention for the reduction of sports injury risk. So my whole area had to do with the sports psychology aspect of injury risk, because we know that there is a lot related to sports psychology after an athlete suffers an injury, but what sort of psychological symptoms can actually predispose them to increased risks. And so, how can we mitigate that risk through any sort of psychological intervention? And mine specifically was mindfulness. Just as a person, professional, I was naturally drawn to mindfulness because I've been practicing it for quite a while. So it seemed like a very natural path to take in my research topic, which was really great. Um, so yeah, so then it came time to do the comp exam. I was in the middle. Am I supposed to be going into this now, or are we asking questions about this?
No, you
It was
can
just
just
more
keep
okay.
keep on going. If there's a spot for a question, I'll throw one in. I'll just let you
Okay.
keep going.
All right. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, so updating from where I was then and then sort of like what happened in the decline and then where I am now, I guess.
Sure.
So my comp exam was scheduled for the end of January in 23. Everything was going swimmingly. There was a couple, like, it's very stressful. Being in a PhD, it can be fun. You can have awesome moments, and obviously mine were more when I'm working with the athletes and like able to talk to them one on one and do the intervention and be on the field because as an athletic trainer, that's where I'm happiest. So, but I love the research aspect of it too. And the relationship with my supervisors wasn't the absolute greatest. It wasn't meeting the expectations that I had, my impression of what I wanted it to look like. And I kind of came to terms with that, I think, in 2022. I was like, okay, well, this probably isn't going to get much better. It's just who they are. And I had to sort of just go along and deal with it the best I could. And one of my colleagues, who is like a big proponent in how far I actually got. He just kept telling me, just keep working, keep being productive, keep coming up with papers, keep writing stuff, keep coming up with plans, just keep presenting them with something. So that's essentially what I did. And I think in the fall of 2022, I got a fire really lit under me. And I was just like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm getting into the intervention study now. I did my proposal that year, or the year before. And so I was just kind of like continuing the momentum. And so, and our program, so the comp exam, for most people who aren't aware of like what essentially that is, like originally I think it was established it's like a traditional pathway, and it's essentially testing you on all of the coursework that you've done in the program. But in your fourth year, you've already been out of coursework for 2 years, and it's essentially supposed to be done before you start any research and before you actually do your proposal. So mine was a bit delayed in that regard. So what it ended up being is the way that our format had been structured was we had to write a paper. You had an option of doing a written exam and a paper, or no, written exam and an oral exam. But the written exam, you had 3 topics and you had like a week or something to return, just an essay about that topic question. Whereas I decided to do just a paper on one topic that had to be publishable, like at the end product. Um, and then we had to do an oral exam where they had 30 papers, 10 in 3 different subject areas. And then you literally sat in a room with your supervisors and committee members to answer any questions they had on those 30 articles. And I had 2 months to prepare that. I had been writing the paper since the previous year. I loved my paper. It was a review paper. I always had a sense that I would go back and finish that paper because it was to the point where it could publish. I just needed to register it and go through like the actual proper Prospero protocol to do a systematic review. But so that was on mindfulness interventions in the physical therapy atmosphere for rehabilitation and how it affected outcome measures on depression, pain, and anxiety, I believe, if I recall correctly. And then the oral exam, I had 3 different categories. So one was mindfulness in rehabilitation, statistical analysis in mindfulness research, and well, I forget what the third topic was. It's been a while and I've completely removed myself. So yeah, so preparing for it for 2 months, never was asked if I was doing okay in preparations, never asked if I needed any help. I was rarely on campus. I think maybe a couple times. It was over the Christmas break as well. Was definitely hard at work on studying those papers and making sure I was prepared while also getting the ethical approval to start the intervention study, putting out all of the media and recruitment strategies. And I had recruited 80 participants the week before I did my comp exam. And literally, the comp exam was the most traumatic experience I think I had ever been through. And I went into a withdrawal, and after, it didn't go very well. And I felt like I was attacked. I felt like I was targeted, even though like in the sort of postmortem, we they told me they were trying to help me with certain questions, and I just like I was definitely, it was a fight or freeze, and I was freezing like pretty bad. And nobody was doing anything to sort of like resolve what was happening. It was just like they kept trying to kept trying to ask me questions. And obviously it wasn't getting through to me. I got confused. I was drawing blanks. I couldn't engage. So it was pretty bad. So then after that, and actually I had one friend that was in the exam with me, which they didn't understand, like it wasn't I don't think it was supposed to be open to the public, and normally comp exams aren't. But I had sat in on other colleagues' exams, just out of curiosity of what their setup was going to look like, what types of
Sure.
questions they were going to be asked. So I was doing my sort of reconnaissance of how to prepare, because that's all I had to go off of. And mine felt nothing like the ones I sat in on. And so when I walked out of that room, and my friend looked at me, and she's a colleague too, and she asked me, she's like, "What was that?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And at that time, like my central nervous system just shut down, and I started crying. So it was a super, super emotional breakdown after that happened. thankfully I was scheduled to go on a ski trip to Whistler. So I told my supervisors that I just needed to step away and sort of recenter. When I got back, I was not motivated. I didn't want anything to do with them. I didn't want anything to do with school. Like I was just it was in like a pretty big breakdown, like the biggest I've ever experienced. And yeah, man, I was talking about getting the tissues ready, like just thinking about like where I was and how I felt. It was really, really bad. And I went into a little bit of a depression. And so they gave me another few weeks to sort of um, you know, see if anything were to come of just be having some time off. And when I recollected myself to talk to them, because it was a natural tendency to like not want to confront people that have hurt you. And I obviously don't think it was a personal malintention. It's just the nature of how our nervous systems work in protecting ourselves. I finally had the courage to talk to them again after all of that. And I told them that I really needed a break. So they gave me the options of what I could do, and a leave of absence was the most appealing to me. Um, so then I was planned or scheduled to be on a leave of absence for the end of the till the end of the summer and hopefully reconvene in the fall. During that time, I was heavily into therapy, working with therapists to sort of navigate my emotional turmoil, what it all meant, and giving me the opportunity of reflecting on if it was something I even wanted to continue. Like, was it beneficial to me professionally? What was my purpose? What was my why of doing the PhD? You know, how I handle sort of situations and how I see success. Um, all of that came into question on whether it was worth it or not to continue. And ultimately, my happiness was not worth it anymore. I didn't like who I was as a person. I didn't like who I was as a partner. I didn't feel that I was showing up in the capacity I would want to be and how I've known to be in a relationship. And I mean, we were engaged at that point in the same year that we were getting married, and I was like I couldn't see myself restarting the PhD in the fall at the same time that we're supposed to be getting married and it go well. So, and that's not the only reason I ended up ultimately walking away. It was just out of that 6 months I was on a leave of absence, I never heard from anybody. I didn't hear from administration. I never heard from my supervisors. Nobody really reached out to see how I was doing. Not even like a month before my scheduled return was supposed to
Sure.
happen, like nothing happened. Um, so it was extremely difficult, and like you can imagine, just questioning yourself, what's next. I'd put a lot of I was still coaching on the side, was still doing online virtual coaching as well. And I was developing a potential partnership. And then around the same time that I drew the partnership didn't go the way that we either of us had foreseen it happening. So I really just needed to switch gears. And I had an amazing opportunity working with Nike basketball, and kind of just had a reacquaintance of my passion of working with athletes and helping them with injury prevention, but also providing them the proper tools to stay healthy and have longevity in sport. And that's sort of where I started launching into my business now known as Performer X. So I did a name change to the already registered Movement Matters that I already had. And then am building a platform that's kind of bigger and better and hopefully can work with more athletes on that level. Um, so yeah, so when I think about it and the whole process of everything, it still hits, it still triggers, and I don't know if there will ever come a time where it doesn't. It's definitely, a time in my life that was the hardest most difficult and challenging thing I will probably ever have to do. I'm still open to the opportunity potentially to go back to a doctorate program if the timing and if the supervisor and if the topic aligns with still what I want to do. So if someone is willing to take the projects that I was doing or the topic area, um, and is essentially the environment that I foresaw, which is like teamwork and enthusiasm and partnership, as opposed to more of a domineering sort of situation, then I'd be more than happy to revisit that idea. But for now, focusing on the business and what I want to do.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it. I know we've talked about it a little bit otherwise, but it's always appreciated to hear it and share it. I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind digging into a little bit more, just off of a couple of things you said. One, kind of going back to where you decided to take the pause, you were working through a lot of stuff. You had mentioned therapy. Um, One that always comes to my mind, and I'll share an own kind of like personal anecdote to it, but is, the sunk cost fallacy of you had put in so much time, you had put in so much effort. At what point do you really like you said, transition to, is this really the best thing for me? And I know that's something I went through, of leaving a previous job for a current job. We had built a lot of cool things, like built up a staff, a program, everything was going really well, and then it didn't seem like it was going to anymore. And it's just like, well, do you keep fighting on and barreling through because that's the thing you need to do at this point in time? Maybe. Or did it get as good as it was going to get,
Right.
and it was time for a different thing? And that, I had that conversation with myself a lot. We were just on social media messaging back and forth on a book that I just read, Quit by Annie Duke, which talks a lot about that. Like, she also talks about, Angela Duckworth had her very famous and good book Grit, about
Hmm.
persevering through, and Annie Duke does a really good job of talking about, grit is meant for specific times and places. It doesn't mean for anything and everything. And her and Angela Duckworth have had a lot of conversations about that, and that there's this, again, this balance between the two. But um, now that I've rambled for a little bit, if you could share anything else that really went into that, again, investing that many months and years, plus all
Hmm.
that energy, and then really being able to balance that back to deciding that it was time to just let it go, at least for the extended time being.
Yeah, totally. Um, Well, I mean, the whole opportunity to do the PhD came at a really organic time in my life where I had just developed a partnership, a relationship with my boyfriend at the time, while I was living in Oregon. And we had gotten to the point where we made it official and made sort of an expiration date because it was long distance. He lived here in Quebec and I was in Oregon. And it was like, okay, well, we'll do this for a year and then we'll decide who's going to go where. During like our numerous talks, I had mentioned about doing the PhD, and he had asked if I had ever looked into Canadian schools, and I hadn't. So when I knew that I was coming out to visit, I literally Googled kinesiology PhD Canada,
Nice.
and that the program that I attended was the first one that popped up. So I looked into it. I reached out to the program director, and it seemed very kismet. Like, he was an athletic trainer and an athletic therapist. It was an athletic therapy lab. So I was really excited just to be a part of that in another country. And it essentially provided me the study permit to come to Canada. So it worked out like in that sense where I was able, like, it took the guesswork out of who was going to move. Like, I just
Sure.
came to Canada and moved in with him. So and then when I was talking to my therapist last year, she asked me about how, like the whole process of the PhD, like semester to semester went. And actually since, like, I've spoken to the interim program director as well, and she was very thankful that I shared my experience with her, and she was sort of going to do an investigation on it. because she needed to get their point on it and also talk to other students, because there's also one other PhD student that mastered out and she had spoken to her. And so it was a bit of a trend, which not necessarily a good thing, but she just has to get all of her ducks in a row and sort of
Yeah.
see what's going on, if it's an internal problem or not. So, but when I was talking to my therapist and she asked me about the first semester, like the first semester when I moved here was extremely difficult. Like, not only am I living in a totally new country, starting a new relationship, moved in, with someone, and then there's a language barrier here, like, because it's French is the primary language of Quebec. So assimilating to him and his family and his friends and his culture, and it didn't help that school and my research and everything was all in English. So I'm doing that full time. I'm also working in a clinic with athletes where I speak and interact with them in English too. So there was just like a lot of things going on at one time. And I was in this stats class that was a freaking nightmare. And that was toning myself down because it's a podcast. But it was the hardest stats class, and it was essentially presented as a rite of passage for clinical psychology students. And why I was put in this class, I have no idea. I don't even think I had the option, but I knew that there was another one that other colleagues were taking. They were having a much easier time than we were. That caused me so much anxiety. I started gritting my teeth or grinding my teeth at night, and that was the first time I'd ever done that. So I was thankful when that class over, and it was pretty much smooth sailing after that for the most part. And then upon further reflection, it was, if there was any sign that I wasn't being productive, um, I was getting condescending remarks. They didn't, it almost felt like extremely difficult to get like compliment or any sort of, acknowledgement of progress. It was almost like, this is not enough. This is not good. This is what you need to do. Go back and fix it. All of the red marks you could think of, all the comments and suggestions. And the word disappointing was used numerous times. I just am the thought that I had of going into higher education and working in a lab full of athletic therapists was essentially we're contributing to the sports medicine field on a whole nother level. Where, I was actually the only athletic therapist in our lab, even though it was the athletic therapy lab. Only my supervisors were the other athletic therapists. And so they were super excited to have me there. And I just thought it was going to be a bit more collaborative than what it
Sure.
was. And I always considered myself sort of the black sheep of the lab, because my research topic wasn't exactly the same as either of my supervisors or anybody else's in the labs. So I was pretty much on my own when it came to like being enthusiastic about my area of research. And and I was okay with that. And then I think I just, and my therapist had asked me about my parents and sort of like what they did for work and things like that. And they, like, I'm the first person to go to college in my family, and my dad was a laborer for over 30 years and still doing that. And like any typical parent doesn't have um is not open with emotional sharing. So like if I knew that something was wrong, I would ask him if everything was okay, and he would say no, or he would say yes, and then I would ask him, would you tell me if it weren't? And he was like, no. So I was telling this to my therapist, and I'm getting very personal, by the way. And so my therapist asked, oh, so your dad was sort of like a grin and bear it type of guy, and that's how you were raised? And I was like, oh, good. Like, yes. Like, this is exactly what I guess I've been doing without even realizing it, because like working in mindfulness and researching it, like I definitely have a certain level of emotional awareness. But when I'm doing it for like an end result at this point, it was just more of like, I'm just trying to get through. The only thing I can control is myself. And I know that I can't control the supervisors, I can't control the program. So I'm just going to do the best I know how to do without really any support or system in place at the school to like help me in that process, except for my colleague, which is, like I said, like he was a huge help. So yeah, so I think talking to her and talking through like what I had in mind and what actually ended up being the truth of the situation, I was like, I got one paper done. I got almost a second paper done. I know a lot more about mindfulness and injury prevention than I ever thought I would learn in a short period of time. So, like, I think I got out of it what I could have without sacrificing any more of myself and in my emotional well being. And also, like, without putting any strain on my relationship. Like when I first moved here, he was in his master's, like his MBA, while working full time. I was in my PhD and working part time. So like we were just constantly busy. And then when he finished after 2 years, like it was still just me in school. So like he was, trying to take care of more things and putting more on his plate because he had the extra time. And I was at the point where I was like, I want us to do this together now. I don't want it to be one-sided anymore. And that's essentially what drew me to the conclusion of I'm ready to have a life, have a social life, get outside more, do all the sports I want to do, and just work and put out and work with athletes as much as I can instead of just sticking my head in research and books and writing. So, yep, that's essentially it.
The second question that, and then we can kind of jump into more of, perform our action. Just in hindsight, and I feel like I could probably pick up a couple things that you said along the way, but I'd like to hear your thoughts more. Had they done something, whatever it would have been, do you feel like that would have changed the outlook along the way? A simple reach out. Hey, how are things going? Hey, we know this didn't go, the exam didn't go how you wanted it to. Let's work together, or whatever it may be, to get ready for the next time. To whenever you're ready. Is there anything that could have been done that you would have been like that would have changed it for you and potentially the outcome of it, big or small?
Yeah. Well, we did like when we did sort of so we met right after the exam, which is when they told me like obviously you didn't pass, like you didn't do well, blah blah blah. And that was that evening. And then we did have another conversation because I had to tell them that I wasn't doing well. Like 2 weeks had gone by and they still hadn't reached out. So I let them know, like, hey, I haven't been around. I haven't been working on anything. Like, I'm just not well right now. And I don't know when that will be. And so that's when we had a conversation and they sort of told me that, the external committee member had asked them if there were any systems in place to help with students to prepare for the comp exam, and there weren't, obviously. And it took me failing for them to be like, whatever you support you need, like we'll get you ready for the second attempt. I'm like, why would it take me failing for you to offer these services, or just be on any human level, make sure that your student is prepared? Um, so for me, it was like I felt it was too little too late. Especially if you build that on top of sort of the strenuous relationship we had already been having. Um, which like I don't know if you could just put it on, like people with higher education may not have an intuition to sort of like connect with someone on a human level or a personal level. And I never felt like I had that, um, which was extremely difficult because I mean, we've been talking, like I'm very outgoing. I love meeting new people and I love, working in a collaborative environment. And it never felt like that was there. They would come into the lab, and if I was there, I would like have to say hello. Like I would never get one initially. And just witnessing the demeanor that they had with other students compared to how they were with me, it was like it was hard to not take it personal. I'm like, okay, so what do I what am I not doing? You know, am I just not being
Sure.
productive enough? Am I not here enough with the expectation of being here 9 to 5, even if I don't have to be? Like it was a bit, just like I was never winning in the sense that I could never build that same rapport. And it's hard to continue knowing that. And then the anxiety built before every time I talk to them or before I send off an email. I'd always get a comment about the email structure not being right or proper grammar being used in an email. Like it was very just constant criticism. Some good, obviously, needs to be had, and some just like unnecessary. Like
Sure.
it's okay. It's okay. Like there are other things that we should probably focus on that you don't need to be on that. And maybe it wasn't even me. Maybe it wasn't me personally. It was just whatever they were dealing with gets projected on to their connection with me. So I don't know. So yeah, like I I think it might just be their personalities, and it came, it dawned on me a couple years later that that's just how it was going to be. And I would like to think that people can change and evolve. Um, but the sense that I get from talking to other people in PhD programs is, the relationship with supervisors is a hit or a miss. There's a lot of people that suffer strained relationships. And it sucks. And I wish it were different. But it's more of that I went through this and I'm gonna haze you just like I did. And until we get younger academics in those types of leadership roles and faculty positions, I think it's just going to be that way. And essentially because I'm also wasn't doing it for academic purposes. I wasn't trying to be a professor or a faculty member. I wanted to do it to learn more, contribute to the science field, and you just build my professional aptitude as well. So, yeah,
Appreciate your thoughts on that as well.
yeah.
Um, Anything else around this that we haven't covered before sharing what the Form RX is and what you're doing now?
Uh, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. I guess I would say that it's a chapter of my life that is come to a close, but I feel like it's gonna be a hamstring strain that if you don't take care of it, it's gonna keep bugging the shit out of you. Um, and that's anytime I'm gonna talk about it, anybody who asks me about it, it's gonna have that little sore spot on my heart
Sure.
of like, it was really crappy situation, and I'm sad that it happened. But I'm happier in life now than I was last year. Which is a big sign to me that like it wasn't the proper timing for me. So yep, I guess that was it for that little bit.
Just a little bit. I also really like the hamstring analogy. Well done with
I
that.
use it a lot. Like people when they have strains in there and they just try to play on it to test it, like it's never gonna go away.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what is Perform RX? Kind of the shift. What are you doing with it? I know you and I have talked about this, but just kind of sharing for anybody else that's listening and is curious.
Yeah. Well, so when we originally did that first episode, I was doing Movement Matters, which Perform RX is a continuation and expansion of that. So I'm still doing virtual one-on-one training, providing strength and conditioning programs to active individuals of all ages, skill levels, and competition levels as well. So recreational and competitive athletes. But in addition to that, I decided that I wanted to take my role in more of the consulting realm. So working with sporting organizations, because I had put on like a educational seminar to a high school. Actually, when I first moved out here, I created what was called the Complete Athlete Program. And I went to their high school in not New Jersey, New Hampshire, and sort of just did like 1 day these are all of the elements that you should be including in the in and outs of everyday life of being an athlete. And so sort of just hitting all of the pillars of health is like mindfulness, leadership, recovery, injury prevention, strength training, sports skill, proper body maintenance, like all kinds of those things. And so I was like, how can I do this on a bigger scale? And so the first step usually to work with programs is help them be aware that sports medicine needs to be involved. So, like, are they required to have an athletic trainer, athletic therapist present at their sporting events? Are they working with one at all? Do they have a sports medicine person that they consult with and help plan their events? And so that's sort of what I wanted to do with Performer X is I'm not only working with individuals on a one-on-one basis for strength training, rehab, etc., but also like at the organizational level. So teams, recreational organizations. So even like there's a free women's mountain bike club that I'm a part of. It's like, who are they using? Like,
Sure.
how can I access that graphic of people? Because there's a lot of people our age. Like, we're obviously not getting any younger, but we still want to be active and competitive. So what are we doing to take care of ourselves and not just using our sport as exercise, but like strength training to prevent injuries on that level too?
Yep.
So yeah, so multifaceted, but on a consultant front.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Excited to see where you go with that. That was one thing, especially with like Movement Matters, and then just kind of following you over the course. Mainly on social media is like the entrepreneurial side of everything, and the go out on your own. Um, has always been something I've been interested in, but I always hedge my bets and never seem to quite go all for it. So I always admire that in anybody, but obviously you and I being connected of just that willingness to do it. It's just impressive and admirable. So wanted to throw that in there for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate to be in a position that allows me to put it all in there. With my husband being our main support. And he's fully on board with me. I like knowing that I'm transitioning into another country. I'm also waiting for my work permit right now, so I can't legally work in Canada like one-on-one in person. So, my business is established in the States and registered in California, so I can still work virtually and function that way. And so I'm at least earning a little bit.
Sure.
But then, I was working with a business coach that I've been working with, and she helped me establish Movement Matters too. And, I worked with her to establish this new sort of expansion and area that I wanted to explore and get into. So she was helping me with that. And I'll officially hopefully be signing my first big contract. I sent it over to my attorney to make sure that like all of the components of it are on point and I'm not missing anything because it was super like basic template that I found. So the legalities of like working with a big contractor, totally different and a little intimidating, and I don't want to mess it up either. So I was just like just getting a shoe in and working with them on whatever level I can, even if it's finding their one AT for their one tournament or the AT for their one camp.
Yep.
Um, so just starting in that sense and hopefully building more rapport with that, just not that organization, but others. And like I think I was just telling you before we hopped on, is like developing that relationship on any level that gives me a say, like I'm because essentially I started with like going over how many people were going to be present, how many courts are going at one time. This is what my recommendation is. This is what I can provide for you. And it was like the ultimate of sports medicine support, right? And
Yep.
then it's like, well, this is our bottom line. This is what we can actually pay for. This is what we've done in the past. And it's like, okay, well, even if I'm just getting you the one AT and not doing all the other bells and whistles, we'll start with that and then see what happens.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, like I said, I'm super fortunate to be able to dive into entrepreneurship and be in a circumstance where it's possible.
That's awesome. Well, are you ready for a slightly tweaked and modified AT chat questions.
Sure. Yeah, let's go for it.
Um, Now that it's been 4 years, 3 to 4 years basically since we've asked these, where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years, especially if you've got some insight being north of the border?
Right. Yeah, so I was looking at that question and I was like, I don't even remember what I said for the last time. I didn't go back to the other episode to see what I said. Um, and I was just thinking about this too. Crap, what was I thinking about? Um, oh man. And then I was just talking about, thinking in my head of like the lack of marketing on the NATA side for like um being more proponents of athletic trainers. I don't remember why I was saying that. But I was thinking of like my why of why I was doing the PhD, and that was essentially because I thought it was gonna propel me forward in my career of like having an equal playing field with physical therapists. Because I
Sure,
always felt like what I said always had to be confirmed with with someone's physical therapist, and I never understood that. I'm like, we essentially do the same thing. Like, why? Like, and then so they after they would hear the same thing, and I work collaboratively with multiple physical therapists, and we share ideas with each other. It was I was like, oh, I probably need to get the doctor in front of my name. So I like a part of me, I was like, who do we fault that to? Do I fault that to us, like on our level of like not doing a good job of like advertising and educating people on, what athletic trainers or athletic therapists do and what our role is
sure,
in many different industries? Or do I just blame that on the NATA for not doing a good job of advertising our profession and doing more lobbying efforts? I don't know. So like I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities that I hope in 5 to 10 years that we make up for that and actually put out a lot of marketing campaigns to make our profession more known in the allied healthcare field, and that we are in the same playing field and that our advice and our services are extremely valuable. Um, and I think I was talking to another athletic trainer about this, but the name change, like I think it's highly needed. And I was talking to her about the fact that they're called athletic therapists up here. And that at least is a step in the right direction, but needing a name that reflects our chameleon like skills of like we can pretty much take on a lot of industries and our knowledge and skill set is extremely unique. And so a name that reflects that would be ideal. I don't know what that is. I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't think anyone does, which is probably why it's been so hard to figure it out.
sure.
But yeah, and then just, seeing athletic trainers just dominate every single industry because we're needed in every single environment you could think of. We have something to offer that's valuable. So, yeah, now that we become equal and we don't need to be supervised anymore, we can be. And like the main difference between Canada and the States is I can act alone. I can get third party reimbursement, so I can provide receipts and for my services, and clients can get reimbursed from their private insurance. So
Awesome.
I would definitely like to see that happen in the States. It's I can't believe that they're actually ahead of that up here than down there. It doesn't make any sense.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
What advice would you go back and give yourself? And I'm just going to change it slightly at any point during your doctoral program, if you could go back and do so.
Well, it's crazy because I've always been a person that like as soon as I think about wanting to do something, I essentially have applied or gone after it. And like the first opportunity that's presented, I jump after it. And that's essentially what happened with this. And I think I might have taken a little bit more rigor in my approach to finding a program,
Fair.
like actually scoping it out and investigating it a little bit more. And, like being the first cohort didn't stand out as a red flag to me. Like I was very excited to be part of something that was new and getting launched and, wanting to kind of build that with them. But looking back, I don't know if it was the best idea. And then also talking to people who have graduated or not graduated from the program, and see where they're at and what they found, if they found it valuable, and if it, what their experience looked like. And then maybe just exploring other options, like reaching out to different programs and supervisors and seeing what they were offering in comparison to what I had. So yeah, just better recon.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Um, any new influential resources that you've come across?
Um, Interesting. Hold on. I know that um, I had put some bullets on this one. Where's that? Eliminate one thing. Uh, okay. Um, and that was, yeah. I'm gonna honestly say, like I'd mentioned him before, but my colleague,
Sure.
he was the most influential resource that I had. He did his master's there, but he's also just brilliant. He is a kinesiologist, and he was looking into physical literacy in young children and adolescents. And he is a stats whiz. Like I've never met anybody who was a stats whiz, and he actually very much enjoyed it. And he was in the class, that crazy class with me. And so he had a different relationship, and we had the same supervisors. Well, technically he had one of my two, but he was also working with the other one on other projects. So his relationship was totally different with them as well. And so he was the one that kind of just, kept telling me to just keep working. And any question I had, or if I wanted him to, needed a second set of eyes or an opinion on something, he was always there, no matter like how busy he was. And I've told him many times how grateful I was for him. He's now doing his postdoc at Baylor School of Medicine. So like yeah, he's definitely one of the most intelligent, smart, and amazing guys that I know. But he also just dives straight into work, and there's no room for anything else. And I was like, I definitely don't want to do that.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, my colleague was one of the most influential resources that I had while I was at my PhD. Um, and also like the other colleagues in the program, that we would have our lovely venting sessions about everything crappy of higher education.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had this question when originally, but I wanted to ask it to you anyway, especially now. As an
Hmm.
AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, you did have that in there. But we didn't do that last time for sure.
Okay,
Yeah. And I like this question a lot because I think it's an important question to ask everyone in our profession. So to take care of myself, like I'm an athlete and I have my own athletic ambitions. And so also have a coach. Like I don't undervalue, I hate writing my own programs, and I think it's important for all coaches to have their own coaches. And so he's writing my program to help me strength train. I'm planning to do several races this summer for mountain biking. I just ordered my new mountain bike, so I'm super excited to just beast mode and dominate these races in my age category. There's not a
nice.
lot of women in my age category doing these types of races, so I'm super excited to see the potential that it has for maybe like higher competitions, like higher level competitions, to see if
Sure.
I've got the stuff, and I have my own yoga meditation practice. I strength train on a regular basis. I'm always doing outdoor activities. Like my husband's a high level skier, so we're constantly skiing. Definitely love to be outdoors, spending time with not just my husband, but our friends and family. Like we have a really close relationship with my in-laws, and I'm about to go on a 6-week sailing trip with them in Greece. So it's very close. And so I'm doing a lot of travel this year as well. So it's definitely a whole different year than it was last year. And I'm much happier. So I'm glad to be able to continue the practices that I preach to everybody.
I like that. If you could eliminate one thing in the field of athletic training when it kind of comes to continuing your education, what would it be?
kind of didn't really understand this question, so I went a certain way with it.
Go
Um,
for it.
and I think I took out the continuing that. No, no, I think I still kept that in there. Um, and here's what I have. Like really thought about this and wrote down what I wanted to say. I said that that we fit in a box as a profession. And I kind of touched on it earlier, but like we have skills and a knowledge base that covers so many areas. And I love that we can be chameleons in many different settings that in anything that we put ourselves in. And my area of research was limited in the amount of athletic training position contribution, which was my whole reason for wanting to be a part. Oh yeah. So like having athletic trainers be a part of, research, not necessarily having to go the PhD route, but like just having athletic trainers in the sports psychology realm of research, because we already limit ourselves in our capacity to use psychological interventions and psychological approaches in our practice. I think it was I always never really thought about it until an athlete's presented in front of me of like, now we need to work on this. We need to help
Sure.
use stretch management techniques. But like thinking about it on a preventative basis and talking about it more frequently with athletes, which is why like having an athletic trainer in the sport psychology research and contributing to that was one of the reasons I was hoping to be a part of that, just to make it more known of like we are qualified, we can use these strategies, and we should definitely be doing it more. Um, and then just having more CEUs, and that's where the continuing education part, like just having more opportunities that talk about how we can apply these skills and this knowledge as opposed to just recognizing the signs and symptoms and referring, and starting the conversation and making it a part of like our integrative system when we work with athletes. Yeah.
I like it. So thanks for answering it, even though it was a poorly worded question on the
It's
back
okay.
end. Last one. What is being an athletic trainer, especially with your focus on strength and conditioning, and also just everything with Perform RX and everything going on? What does that all mean to you?
Oh, it's funny because we were just talking about this before we started, and I didn't even realize that I also had it in here. Um, when we first come out of school and we're just like fresh off our clinical rotations, and we've witnessed injury evaluation, so we know how to assess on a very basic level. We know how to treat, tape, rehab,
Yep.
whatever else goes along, with getting them back onto the field, which we've basically just did on like a superficial level or like a very spot specific level. Like someone sprained their ankle. Okay, great. So now we know they sprained their ankle. So we're going to treat that site. We're going to treat that area. We're going to rehab that area. We're going to make sure it's functional at the end of it. And then if it's all good, equal to the other side, you're ready to go. Right. We never really were equipped with the know-how of like looking on a global perspective of working with athletes and injuries and everything that's multi-layered that goes along with that could potentially like get them re-injured, which is not necessarily the injury itself. So that's, the whole purpose of incorporating strength and conditioning and all the other multifaceted approaches that I have with being a coach in addition to an athletic trainer. So,
Perfect.
and no matter level, age, skill, sport, like you can't excel as an athlete if you don't take care of the human first. So, like taking them out of sport, treating their injury, but treating everything else from inside and out.
Such a powerful and important point that, yeah, it can get lost, especially when things are busy, and just
Right.
people trying to get back. So,
Mm-hmm.
always a good reminder. To wrap things up, if people wanted to follow you, connect with you, send a question, whatever works best, what would be the best place for them to do that? And we'll link all this up on the episode page.
Yeah, so I have an Instagram page. It's perform.rx. I have an official domain, performrxconsulting.com. So that's my website. It lists all my services, has a little snippet about me. I think there's a blog. Yeah, there's a blog on there. So I'm planning to contribute a bit more to that. And then you can email me at performrx.sportsmed@gmail.com as well. So, yeah, thank you so
Awesome.
much. Yeah.
Well, it was great to formally and officially reconnect. Again, appreciate you sharing your story, especially for the conversations we had off air, just of how difficult it was and all the things going through. So really, really appreciate that and think there will be plenty of people that it'll resonate with and hopefully help them make the decisions that they need to in their lives as well.
I hope so, because I know that when you first sent me the idea of, sharing my story and you sent me those questions, I immediately just broke down and started crying. And that's when I was like,
Sorry
think
about
I'm
that.
ready for this. No, it was good. I mean, it definitely were questions that I had already, my therapist had asked me, and we had gone over right at the beginning when I started sessions with her. And then to see them again, even 3 months later and still have a similar reaction, I was like, yeah, I'm not okay. So it was just a good verification of like still taking my time and navigating it as best as I could. So appreciate the check-in.
I do what I can, but anyway, thanks for being on again, and we'll look forward to talking next time, hopefully on the evolution of Perform RX.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Athletic Train Chat. Thank you again to Shauna for being so open about everything that she had went through and just some of the struggles that came along with all these decisions and really putting in that much time and effort. I know that's one I've thought about a lot with a lot of different things. I tend to not let things go these days. I probably should, but hopefully if it's something that you've experienced or you're going through, that this was enlightening and at least just somebody else's perspective. And as always, if you want to come on and chat about it and tell your story, we're happy to have you. If you haven't heard of the Athletic Training Daily Journal yet, it might be worth checking out. 14-day free sample at clinicallypress.org/shop. You can see it. It's a journal with some prompts based off of quotes and passages that are specifically to the AT profession to really just try and help you grow as a professional and as a person. It's something that Rick and I both wish we would have had when we were coming up in the profession and face a lot of things that we did. So again, check that out at clinicallypress.org/shop for the 14-day free sample, or find it on Amazon. I just search for Athletic Training Daily Journal. I might have to scroll just a little bit, but we are there. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you next episode.